There's a moment that defines the experience of being single. It isn't marked by grand events or dramatic loneliness. It comes quietly, often in the spaces between things, after hanging up the phone, before the music starts, while making dinner for one. It's the realization that there is no one listening, no one waiting, that your life, in this moment, belongs only to you. At first, it can feel disorienting, as if something's missing, as if your life were paused, waiting for its real story to begin. But then, if you stay with it, something else emerges. A strange kind of presence, not of another, but of yourself. In that silence, undiluted by performance or expectation, you begin to encounter who you are when no one else is shaping you. Not a partner, not a parent, not a friend, just you, in full, unbroken form. And that's when the old stories begin to unravel. The story that happiness must be shared to be real. The story that love is the only path to meaning. The story that solitude is lack. In a world obsessed with connection, solitude often carries the scent of deficiency. We rarely question the assumption. To be partnered is to be whole. To be single is to be waiting. But what if that assumption is wrong? What if the person in that sunlit room is not incomplete, but free? Let's begin here, with the cultural myth that equates love with purpose. From childhood, we're fed the idea that a meaningful life culminates in romantic union. Fairy tales end with weddings. Films reward the lonely protagonist with the perfect partner. Songs mourn the absence of the one. And it's not just entertainment, it's the architecture of our social world. Valentine's Day, couple discounts, +1 invitations. Even our language betrays us. Settling down, as though chaos precedes companionship and order follows it. But the great philosophers rarely spoke of romantic love as salvation. Nietzsche warned that marriage could be a long conversation, and advised one should marry only someone they would enjoy speaking with for decades. Schopenhauer was even more skeptical, calling romantic love a trick of nature to ensure reproduction, not happiness. Simone de Beauvoir suggested that love becomes problematic when it is expected to complete us. She wrote, "One is not born but rather becomes a woman, and similarly, perhaps one is not born whole by another's presence, but must become whole in their own solitude." These thinkers were not cynics. They simply pointed to something we are often afraid to consider, that love, especially romantic love, is not always liberating. Sometimes it is binding, limiting, distracting. Sometimes it becomes a veil. In solitude, by contrast, there is a nakedness that reveals who we really are. There is no need to perform. There is no echo of another's expectations. There is only the self, raw, undistracted, unfiltered. That can be terrifying, but it can also be illuminating, because in that emptiness, something stirs. There's a peculiar moment that many people experience in the early weeks of living alone. You make dinner for one. You eat in silence. You wake to no alarm but your own. No negotiations over space. No compromises about the thermostat, or the lights or the dishes. For a while, this autonomy feels strange, even sad. But then, something shifts. You start to hear your own thoughts more clearly. You begin to notice your patterns, your needs, your moods, not in relation to someone else, but as they truly are. This is the mirror of solitude. It reflects you back to yourself without distortion. Carl Jung spoke of the shadow, the parts of ourselves we ignore or repress. He suggested that solitude was one of the few ways to truly confront it. Who looks outside, dreams. Who looks inside, awakes. In silence, our dreams and our wounds rise to the surface. But what emerges is not just pain. It is also potential. Modern psychology supports this. Studies show that people who spend time alone, not in loneliness, but in intentional solitude, develop better emotional regulation, greater creativity, and stronger self-awareness. They are more likely to know what they want and less likely to tolerate what they don't. They are less prone to codependency, less fearful of abandonment, more resilient in the face of change. In solitude, we become whole, not because we are disconnected, but because we are finally centered. And yet, this goes against so much of what we're taught, that to be alone is to fail, that to dine alone, travel alone, age alone, these are things to pity. But who decided that solitude is emptiness? Thoreau retreated to Walden Pond not out of misanthropy, but to live deliberately. He found depth in the quiet, not despair. And even in religious traditions, solitude is sacred. The Buddha sat alone under a tree. Christ wandered the desert for 40 days. Sufi mystics disappear into the mountains to find what cannot be found in the crowd. There is a clarity that only comes when no one is watching. And this clarity has consequences. When we are alone, we begin to rewrite the story of who we are, not as someone's partner or project or promise, but as a person, a full person. This doesn't mean that relationships are unnecessary, but it means that being single is not a liminal space, a waiting room. It is a destination of its own, a landscape where meaning, growth, and even transcendence are possible. We tend to think of romantic love as the highest form of human intimacy, but intimacy is not exclusive to romance. It can be found in friendship, in art, in nature, in oneself. A single life can be filled with connection, joy, and deep companionship, without ever crossing the boundary into romance. In fact, some of the most fulfilled people have lived alone, walked alone, and died alone, not in sadness, but in peace, because they made solitude their teacher. Return now to that quiet room. It is late. The tea is gone. The light has dimmed. The day has folded itself into memory, and still, there is no sound but breath. This room is not empty. It is full of presence, of self, of possibility. To live alone is not to be without love. It is to discover that love wears many faces, and some of them are your own. But society rarely celebrates this. The single person is often cast as incomplete or selfish or afraid of intimacy. There's a subtle pressure, sometimes overt, to fix the single life with a partner. Friends wonder, when will you settle down? As if peace cannot exist without pairing. But perhaps the single person is not running from love. They're redefining it. Perhaps they are not afraid of commitment, but unwilling to commit to a lie. Perhaps their refusal to compromise their peace is not stubbornness, but wisdom. Not everyone is meant to walk the same path. Some build homes, others wander. Some bind their stories with another's. Others write alone. And there is beauty in both. But it's time we stop pretending that one is superior, because the single life is not lesser. It is not incomplete. It is not tragic. It is a form of freedom, a space for reflection, a place of power. It is a refusal to define oneself through another. And in that refusal, there is room to grow in every direction, to wake when you want, to think what you want, to create, to rest, to dream, without needing to translate those dreams into someone else's language, to feel sadness without having to soften it for a partner, to feel joy without needing it witnessed, to become someone not for another, but for yourself. Of course, this freedom can be lonely, but it can also be expansive, because solitude is not a locked room, it is an open field. And every open field begins as a question with no answer and no need for one.